is the PowerShell Podcast.
Over 1 million hits and counting.
The podcast for PowerShell and the PowerShell community. And now, here's your host, Andrew Pla.
Welcome to another episode of the PowerShell Podcast. I'm your host at Andrew Pla Tech. You can find me in some places. Been posting a lot more. Check me out. I want to let you know that on YouTube, on Mondays at 10 a.m. Eastern Time, we're premiering episodes. We are there in chat. Whenever this episode goes live, Mark Wragg will be in the chat with us, chilling. He's probably there right now. Hi, Mark. Nice to see you. So check us out on YouTube and hit like, comment, subscribe. I mean, while you're at it, show some love. We're here pumping out episodes every single week. And I want to shout out Adrian, who sent me a message sharing some pretty exciting news. So, hi, Andrew. Thanks for today's podcast. I listened to it live for the first time on the YouTube premiere. Nice meeting you, Adrian. It was great chatting. I was encouraged after listening to one of your podcasts to start PowerShell sessions at work to share my knowledge. I think only one person might be interested. Anyway, I feel positive about it. I'm from Gibraltar in Southern Europe. I also found one of your blogs about secret management, which was useful to me. Shout out to you, Adrian. I really appreciate hearing that. It's really cool to hear from people who have some kind of interaction with what you've done. So appreciate you reaching out, and shout out to anyone else in Gibraltar. Adrian's looking for other people, maybe start a user group or something, find some more ways to connect with other people doing PowerShell. And a special shout out to that one person who might be interested, Adrian, because oftentimes getting PowerShell buy-in, it just takes one champion who can sort of help you with your cause. You can have some successes with them and make it easier to introduce others on the team to it. So sounds like you're off to a great start. Appreciate you reaching out. Anyone else want to hit us up, PowerShell@pdq.com, or you can find me anywhere and just shoot me a DM. That's usually how people are sending feedback. I got a tip of the week. So I put out a tweet asking people if they had 1 minute to teach someone something in PowerShell. What do you teach them and why? And Frode Flatten, I might be mispronouncing that, he said tab completion, including wildcard in control space to list all options. So yeah, first of all, got to be using tab completion as you're typing commands. Saves you from mistyping things, helps you ensure that you're finding the right command that actually exists. And it just saves you time, most importantly. You want to get into a good flow and make your life easier. So use that. But also the control space, that's a pretty cool way to display all of the options in a different kind of view, which can be helpful for discovering things. And also, there is asterisk completion. So for example, if you have the AD module installed, try running get-*user tab. Another cool way to discover commands without having to use get command. Very cool stuff there. Just use tab completion. If you're not, you're typing too much. Make it easy on yourself. I also want to shout out the PowerShell MVP Awards. We're announcing our own awards where we highlight different people in the community who deserve it. You can submit your nominations at PowerShell@pdq.com. And for the next several weeks, we'll be going through those nominations and selecting winners. And I already have some people I want to give them to. So even if they're not nominated, I got a few coming to some people who are very deserving. I want to shout out Miriam Weisner, who did an awesome Microsoft Defender XDR Virtual Ninja Training PowerShell YouTube video, which was really cool. Some awesome PowerShell and incident response type stuff. And shout out to her book. We had a great interview with her, but got to plug it again. PowerShell Automation and Scripting for Cybersecurity, Hacking and Defense for Red and Blue Teamers. It really is a great guide. If you have PowerShell in your environment and you want to know how to implement it securely and feel confident about that, this is a great guide. Highly recommend you get it expensed from your boss and you start working through it. Very insightful. And Miriam's amazing. So shout out to her, all the great work she's doing. There is a cool PowerShell project that I wanted to highlight, which is Canary Shell. And this allows you to create a Canary script to monitor a file. And reading the About Me from the project is, this PowerShell script allows you to create another customizable script that is able to monitor a Canary file. That can be any file, and its folder. The general purpose is to stop malwares like ransomwares or attackers from deleting or copying the content of that folder, or at least the script should alert the user while it's happening. The monitoring resources consumption is almost null. The script just checks a few small data periodically. So kind of a cool PowerShell project. Check it out. Check out how it's written and see if you can learn something there as well. Link in the show notes. There is a pretty cool blog from renewed MVP Harm Veenstra on PowerShellIsFun.com about running Azure Cloud Shell locally using Docker. Kind of a cool use case there. There is another blog from a very, very special person named Mark Wragg, who we will be talking to shortly. Looking forward to that. and it is copy files with hash difference via PowerShell. This might be useful if you need to copy just files that have been modified between two paths and aren't able to rely on the modified date of those files to determine which have changed. So interesting use case. Very cool. Check it out. And if you enjoy it, let Mark Wragg know. Now, the moment we've all been waiting for, where we get to introduce the guest, the people in the PowerShell community who make it tick. And I have picked a person who I've admired for a long time, looked at their blogs, always been impressed. Very early on in my career, they were doing very cool cloud stuff, blogging about it, doing awesome Pester stuff when that was brand new to me. So I'd like to welcome Mark Wragg, Azure DevOps engineer, to the podcast. Welcome.
Thank you very much. Yeah, pleasure to be here.
I appreciate your patience, as I was a little maniacal, a little panicked before starting recording today. We were both together, but we're here. We made it.
It was a great intro. I learned about 6 things. I need to listen back and take some notes.
Yeah, watch really them. Thanks. Hey, the PowerShell community is that good. And shout out to that guy Mark Wragg with that blog. And I do want to say, man, I've been seeing like your profile picture, and it's funny. Like with profile pictures, you see the same names over and over, and it's sort of like very recognizable. And deep back in this brain, man, I remember seeing your little icon posting very fancy stuff that was over my head about doing cloud stuff, because you've been doing it for a while. I know cloud is very popular these days, but looking at your blog, man, you've been around.
Yeah, I said to you in the pre-show, maybe not as long as IT in general, but because cloud moves fast, it feels like a long time because it changes so frequently. But yeah, I did some AWS in kind of 2015, I think, where I was working for a company that was kind of touching a little bit on that. And then I don't even know how I pivoted to Azure. I think I just had a really fortunate interview where they didn't ask me too many technical questions because, it was a bit of a fake it till you make it situation. And I got a couple of roles working with Azure that have now I feel kind of pretty comfortable with it. And I think I'd struggled to go back to AWS now because Azure's my jam. And obviously being a PowerShell guy as well, it's like it feels very comfortable being in that kind of ecosystem for sure. So
you were into PowerShell before Azure?
Oh yeah. My sort of start in PowerShell was again around sort of similar time, sort of 2013, 14 maybe. I can't even remember exactly, but I was kind of always a bit of an automation person. Like I grew up with computers from quite a young age. My dad worked in IT, so I was quite fortunate to have kind of computers around me from quite a young age, and like tinkering and breaking things and writing, QBasic and really old programming languages like that. But I kind of, when I started my career, I was kind of a VB scripter, so doing a lot of kind of like VB script automation. And as a Microsoft guy at the time, I think it was kind of quite rare to do automation. I think that sort of traditional, Microsoft sysadmin was quite GUI driven. So if you were someone that could pull a script together and kind of automate stuff, it kind of stepped you up. But then I worked somewhere where I kind of fell into a team lead role, and I hired someone who was really brilliant, who introduced me to PowerShell. I was like, you got to check it out. It's great. And I was like, I'm mid-20s. I'm far too old to learn new things. But he won me over, and yeah, I mean, totally fell in love with it. And I've been in love with it ever since. And my real early experiences that I remember were just being like wanting to audit stuff, and that's why I tweeted you yesterday about PS remoting being something that I think I'd introduced someone to quite early on. Because what you find with PowerShell is if you can, like what I had was like a big like 200 machine VMware VM estate that we often wanted to answer questions about like what version of antivirus is installed on all these VMs, and just to have like a spreadsheet of like here's all my VMs that I've just like dumped out of AD, and then to be able to run a PowerShell script that just goes off and queries the registry for each one of these VMs and pulls out like what version of endpoint protection was installed was like really helpful. And like you were like suddenly it was like, well, this would have taken like days to figure out, and I'm doing it in minutes. So yeah, that's what really won it over for me. Yeah,
when you can multiply your PowerShell and sort of expose to your whole environment and get a whole new use case, very empowering. I think a lot of people, hopefully, who aren't using remoting sort of got their eyes opened in the recent tip we gave, because it really is one of those breakthroughs that is, you don't have to learn much more at all to get a whole lot more value and really expand what is possible. And whenever you're thinking of like your environment and what you have to do, there's this new mechanism you can take advantage of to get data or troubleshoot things or automate processes or whatever it is, communicate between devices, because PowerShell is such a good glue language and duct tape language that any way you can get more of that stickiness, the better.
Yeah, and you know, it hasn't really changed for me either. Like, I think even today I'm still writing scripts that it's like I work a lot with Service Fabric at the moment, and Service Fabric clusters are built of multiple scale sets, so there's kind of tens of VMs, but it's still really helpful to be able to kind of push out, you know, software updates. Sometimes we don't want to we want to sort of roll out like new versions of .NET Framework, and I just write a PowerShell script that pulls the Service Fabric node details out of the Service Fabric commandlets, and then you know, logs onto each one and does that installation and monitors it and reboots the machine, and then jumps onto the next one. And yeah, having that stuff just run automatically, particularly when you're having to work like evenings or weekends for that kind of maintenance, is just really beautiful, because you just got to kick it off and kick back and just keep an eye on it, and yeah, saves you so much time, but also make sure you're getting like a really consistent result. You know, you're not making mistakes, and is so powerful because then you take that framework of like, I've got a script that can run on a load of machines, and when I have to do something different, I just take that script again, make a couple little modifications, and I've got another sort of easy to use tool. So yeah.
And I like that approach, because I think if you don't have the approach where you're making these tools to help you with your job, your work life's going to be a lot more stressful, right? On these times when you're having to work outside of normal hours and things like that, it's going to be a lot more pressure on you to feel like you have to make the actual right decision right here and right now, rather than relying on a system. Like, you have scripts that do it, that are, you know, if you need other people to check them out, you can. If you make an issue, you make an error, you can revert to an earlier revision. Like, it's not all on you to look and see everything perfectly and click the right buttons, because that's a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And obviously, like, you know, you have to be careful, don't you? Because anything that you're doing through automation, you go from breaking one thing to breaking 100 things. So you have to be careful to put those guardrails in place. And you know, I think we're maybe going to talk a bit about testing later, but you know, those things that you can do to make sure that it's doing what you think it's doing.
So you mentioned Service Fabric, and I know there's so much stuff in Azure, but as an Azure DevOps engineer, what do you do? What is an Azure DevOps engineer? And I know DevOps engineer can mean a few different things depending on where you are, but to you and to someone who doesn't have any experience with that, what would you say you do?
Yeah, it is a funny one, isn't it? Because I know I've read lots about DevOps, and I'm a big fan of DevOps as like a culture and a concept. But I'm not sure I've necessarily worked anywhere where I've said, okay, this feels like DevOps. and there is an argument that DevOps that shouldn't be a job title in itself. But I think what I've often found is that the kind of like jobs that used to be like build engineering or like release engineering have kind of been rebranded as DevOps. And that's sort of where I fell into my current role, was that, you know, it's working within the development team to make sure that they have the sort of automation that they need to get the code, you know, tested and ultimately delivered into production. So that's the only way where I am at the moment feels a bit more DevOpsy, is because one of the sort of just historical requirements of the role was that it also delivers the software into production. And that is quite nice, because I collaborate really closely with like the operations teams in the company that I'm at, and make sure that I'm the person that sort of delivered the code into testing and all the test and pre-production environments, and so I can then just make sure the same thing is repeatable into the production environments. But it's nice. I think, you know, I was saying earlier about how I was always a bit of an automation guy, and DevOps engineer for me is kind of like it's felt like the right fit. It's felt like kind of like the role that I think I always wanted, which is that a lot of the time my experience has been that, you know, they hire you and it's not a lot of like micromanagement. It's sort of kind of just stepping back and saying, you know, make stuff faster, safer, more secure, more automated, and just be given that freedom to kind of automate that stuff around. Now, there is also, I get work that is sort of requirements of the project. So yeah, I mean, my day to day, I look after a number of like ARM templates that we use to obviously automate the infrastructure changes and all the pipelines, pipelines around running those changes in, and also sort of deploying the application. And then the application itself was it was pre-established by someone previously had written a lot of PowerShell scripts to kind of do the configuration of the deployment. So sort of maintaining and building on those PowerShell scripts. And then there's just a lot of sort of, I maintain a lot of internal tools, and I sort of, as I say, there's enough scope in the role for a bit of freedom to kind of go, okay, well, we can speed things up by. So most recently, I've been sort of re-implementing our pipelines as YAML, and then implementing some parallelization in that, so you can sort of have YAML pipelines run jobs sequentially to kind of speed up time it takes to deploy. I've put a real big focus recently on cost management, which is why I've put out that blog recently about the tool, which is something that I was kind of using internally for a long time. So again, it's not sort of in my job description, but another sort of opportunity in that role is being really well placed to say, okay, I understand the estate because I'm the one that deploys the infrastructure, that deploys the application. I have a good understanding now of what resources it takes and when we need resources and for how long and what they cost. So it sort of, I kind of took it upon myself to just take some responsibility for costs within the Azure estate, and found like really quickly that you can just tear out like tons of cost by just making sure that you understand what resources are there and what they're for, and making sure that environments only exist when they have to exist, and otherwise kind of get rid of them, particularly with Service Fabric, because as I said earlier, like Service Fabric's it's a bit of a beast in that it runs across a lot of machines usually.
So Azure has, and a lot of different clouds have a ton of different products within them that you can use. And I like to think of it as like, they're sort of like Legos or building pieces, and you kind of need a different piece depending on what you're trying to build. And as a DevOps engineer, my impression is that the company you're working for creates some application or service or something that they either have internally or externally, whatever. And in order to make that, there's different pieces. Sometimes there's a database and you can use some Azure stuff for that. Sometimes you need like multiple servers or other things related to infrastructure and network setups and stuff like that. And you are responsible for not developing the application, but ensuring that all those parts that are required for the application are able to be spun up, able to scale, secure, and there's a whole lot more that goes into it. But is that a pretty fair, like, high-level description?
Yeah, absolutely. As you say, it's kind of like a glue thing. It's about kind of because the cloud's great, isn't it? Yeah, you can just dive in and you can click around the portal and you can spin up anything you need, and it makes it very easy to kind of get started. And there's a GUI, and you can just deploy a VM here and deploy a database there. The problem is that's really brilliant for kind of getting started and being able to kind of quickly get some resources set up so that you can experiment. But once you're doing something more formal, or once you get into a state where, okay, this is going to be a live system that customers are going to use, you want to have that formality around the automation and the source control around making sure that the infrastructure is an artifact of your product and is therefore source controlled, and that adds safety to it because it allows for sort of peer review of changes and allows you to kind of start building pipelines where you can automate tests to make sure your infrastructure is deployed how you expect it to be, or that your application's working the way you expect it to be. So yeah, I think it's just about kind of formalizing. The cloud's great. It's a real like playground, and it's around kind of then starting to build some formality around once you want to get stuff into production, that you do that in a safe way and a predictable and repeatable way, so that you're building in security and that you're just getting a consistent result every time you want to make changes.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the benefits of like infrastructure as code is, we mentioned source control and stuff like that on the podcast, but it's very helpful to be able to have things defined and not have it just be this kind of idea of things that you click this one time, but you have sort of a template that you can run tests against, you can deploy it in different environments, you can have something you can revert to, and sort of a source of truth, so to speak, for your environment. Has that always been a thing in your time in the cloud and as a DevOps person? Or was there a time when, the as code thing wasn't quite yet introduced?
Oh yeah, I mean, I'm ancient. And again, I probably resisted source control a little bit. Again, same person that introduced me to PowerShell. It was a really good guy. I don't know whether it's a name drop him or not, but he was a really good guy, and he brought a lot of new. He was very kind of forward thinking. He was very kind of he was looking to the future, and there was someone that was like, we've got a lot. We started off like a lot of places. We had a lot of ad hoc scripts. A lot of the time it's just on your local machine or maybe on a file share, and then it was kind of like, well, actually, there's this thing called source control. And again, for me, like getting my head around Git as a concept was kind of like, difficult because it's not the most obvious tool to use, but once you do, you don't need to know a lot about Git to kind of be able to kind of push changes up and pull changes down. And once you kind of get the appreciation for, I've got some code here, but I can also have a copy of it on my local machine, modify it, and then sort of synchronize the changes. That's really powerful with regards to kind of then, again, having this like source of truth, having a version history to see like how and when things changed, and being able to like collaborate with people on code. So yeah.
And I think it's probably a little bit easier these days to start doing that. Right. I mean, I'm not like a super fluent in Azure, but I know Azure DevOps. I think there might be easier ways to create templates and turn things into some code that you can use, maybe sync things up. I know that pipelines have come a pretty long way over the years, and they're a lot more prevalent.
Yeah, I've been having fun. I haven't really done much with YAML pipelines. I use them for my GitHub projects, but I have, again, like a real sort of standard template that just, it's run this script, then run this script, then run this script. So playing with YAML pipelines over the last couple of weeks has been really interesting because they feel complicated, but actually once you get your head around the syntax, and if you use the tools in like VS Code to help you spot when you've slightly indented in the wrong place, then they're really good. But yeah, I think infrastructure as code is not hard to get started in Azure because you can build your resources out and then just export. A lot of the time, you just build stuff manually in the portal, export that template. Be wary that it's really verbose when it comes out that way, because it just kind of just exports out all the properties, even stuff that you usually wouldn't even set. So you do have to then kind of cast your eye over it and make it more succinct and only setting the properties that you want to set. But that can be like a really easy way to get started, because I think like particularly because ARM templates are JSON, it can be a little overwhelming if you're starting off with that. Although there's Bicep now, which is much cleaner, and that's something that I've started to look at a little bit. We'll try and convert some of our templates to Bicep. And then also you've got Terraform, which I know a lot of people, I've used a little bit in the past, and it's really good. It's a real clean syntax. So yeah, they can be easier to just write from scratch,
And these are just tools that are basically definitions of whatever you're going to spin up, the servers, whatever services or specifics you need for each thing. It's sort of a definition of everything. Then you feed it to Azure, and it will spin it up based on whatever you give it. Is that sort of a fair rundown?
Yeah. Yeah, it's a bit like desired state. Desired state configuration's gone away. I've kind of touched it. I know it's sort of, I haven't heard people talking about it so much, but it's similar to desired state configuration for, if anyone's using that for PowerShell and, configuring a machine. It's just infrastructure as code is the same thing. You just have this, essentially it's just like, here's how I expect things to be configured. And then you feed it in and it kind of goes, oh, well, it's not configured that way. So I'll create this resource, or I'll change this setting to match what's in your template. Obviously, the important thing there is then like you have to make sure you continue to maintain your infrastructure in that way. Like I know a lot of people get into a mess because they'll start off with good intentions, and then they'll make a lot of manual changes, and then they'll kind of go, I can't trust my templates anymore because I know my state is so different to what's in my template. But Azure have added some tools around that recently but a few years ago, you could start to produce this like what if output, much like the what if command on PowerShell, where Terraform does the same thing, where you kind of, before you run your template, you get this nice output that says, here's all the changes I'm going to make. I built that into our pipelines a few years ago, so that every time we run an ARM template, there's a build step at the start that runs the what if, so you can kind of then pauses the pipeline, so you kind of go back and go, okay, yeah, let's have a look and make sure it is changing the things. And the number of times I go, oh, that's weird, it's going to scale down this database, and I can message the ops guys and go, when did we scale up this database? and then we can just correct the pipeline and go, yeah, okay, well, that's the scale the database should be. And set variables to keep things consistent. But
so you are using a pipeline to ultimately deploy?
Yeah.
Okay,
Yeah, most of our, we're all in Azure DevOps, so we've got pipelines in Azure DevOps that we've historically used, like the classic release pipelines, which are quite kind of UI driven, and sort of how you build them. And then in Azure DevOps, you can also have build pipelines. They've stopped sort of sticking the label build on anymore, and they can be written in YAML, which it allows you to kind of properly store them as code. So that's the conversion I've been trying to make recently, is kind of get us off these sort of classic pipelines and into something that we can maintain in source control.
Cool. And I think that it's so, we talk about PowerShell scripts and pipelines. When you're creating modules, there's ways to, whenever you commit code, you can knock off a pipeline of activities that happen. It could be PowerShell, it could be testing, it could be deploying things to Azure ultimately and sort of delivering a product. But it's sort of a mechanism to organize your automation, and if you do it with the source control front end, you're also able to get the benefits of being able to track things in source control. And it's sort of the mechanism for getting action based on that, from my understanding. Is there a way to do it without? Like, is there any kind of recommended way to not use pipelines? Or is it just like pretty much the way you should be doing things? Yeah,
I don't know. I mean, obviously, like a good thing to have is to have those sort of scripts, those build scripts, for your PowerShell modules, like in the same repository, and with the ability to like run them locally. So like that, I think I stole the ones I use. I largely stole from other people and then sort of modified slightly. But they go through a series of things where they do a build. So they build I like to work in PowerShell modules with lots of just an individual file per function, because I just find that kind of easier to maintain and get my head around, and I could like be able to look at the file system and see what functions a module has.
Yeah, me too.
But I think it can be more efficient to have those combined into a single PowerShell PSM1 file for actual kind of deployment. So again, you can have a script set up to just do that combining of the functions into a single file for when it then gets like published off to the gallery. And obviously then, run your tests, run your Pester tests. And I have like a standard set of Pester tests that I borrowed from someone, June Blender maybe, with regard to like testing that the help is all kind of properly set up. So just it validates that, all of your public functions have like examples or have parameters that are described, and you've got a synopsis and you've got a description. So it kind of keeps me on the straight and narrow and make sure that I'm sort of setting a certain quality bar. And yeah, I mean, obviously, like ultimately you want to run that stuff in a pipeline because it means you don't forget it, so when you commit to the repo, it just kicks off the pipeline automatically and runs those tests. But being able to run them locally is really great. And if you're not ready to kind of go down that automation route, just having those scripts for your sort of local development is really, really useful.
Yeah. And ultimately, this leads to an easier work life because not everything is on you. You can have your tests set in code, and over time, if you find some other thing you need to test for, you can improve your testing, and then every single code commit going forward will be tested with these things that you set. And you mentioned the build example, so step one is to build, which would be, and the example you gave, just combining PS1 files, getting all the contents and putting them into one big PSM1. Bada boom. Then you have your testing where you can run any number of tests using Pester if you're using PowerShell. And then you can publish things to the gallery as a final step in the instance of a PowerShell script. But I want to talk about Pester because you've been into Pester for a long time, and it's a super valuable thing. We've talked about it before in the podcast, but being able to test your code is huge for longevity. If you want to be doing things the right way, you want to be having testing in mind. Especially because the example you just gave where there's like some very simple tests that you can implement, no cost to you, that can ensure a certain code quality in your environment and kind of keep you honest, because we don't want to be developing projects with no help or with, whatever requirements you have in your environment. Hopefully you can set some good standards. You can then write code or use PS Script Analyzer, for example, to run a bunch of tests and see how things are and get you can stop the code commit if things are wrong. But what is Pester? I know it's a testing framework for PowerShell, but
yeah, I mean, Pester's great, isn't it? It's the testing framework for PowerShell. So essentially, it allows you to kind of write scripts that sort of state, how you expect your code to behave. So run your code in lots of different ways and kind of expect to have certain outputs. So it allows you just to write. It's got this really nice language that kind of allows you to write an it statement. So, it should throw an error if I don't give a parameter input, and then you just say, you just try and run your command without a parameter input, and then you pipe it to should throw an error. So it allows you to kind of build up this suite of kind of, here's sort of attacking my code in the ways that it should run, and also let's think about the ways that it shouldn't run and just make sure that it's behaving predictably in those tests. And I've been a big fan. Same guy who got me into PowerShell, and then I don't even know how long later, but he came to me a little bit later. I was just kind of getting my head around PowerShell, and he was like, "Hey, there's this thing called Pester. You should start using it." And I was like, I don't know what this is. I've just got my head around PowerShell. This feels like a whole nother new language to learn. And for me, where it really made sense early on was not testing my code, but it was writing those kind of automated infrastructure type tests or applications.
I was going to ask about those. I like that.
Yeah, and so that was where I worked in that company. We had a lot of we would do application upgrades or deployments or what have you, and there was a lot of kind of manualness to that, and then there was this checklist, like a Word document of kind of right, check that the URL is responding, check that the certificate is correct, check that this service is running, and it was kind of we had this long list of manual checks that you would do, and I was like, well, actually a lot of that can just be done automatically. It's all just checking stuff is configured or running. And so my first dip into Pester was to create a Pester script that was then just cool, get the services. Is this service running? Is this service stopped if it should be? Is the application version this? Is it responding? And because obviously you've got all the power of PowerShell behind that, so you can use invoke web request or invoke REST method to kind of make those calls to endpoints and then read what the response is. And then you turn that this manual checklist that would take an hour and would rely on someone remembering to do it into just run this script, and 30 seconds later you've got your answer as to whether something's configured or not. And that was 10 years ago, and again, I'm still doing exactly the same thing today. I've got exactly the same thing. My current company, there's a lot of testing around the application. So they've got a lot of they've got a dedicated test team, and they run application tests, and they kind of exercise the application works in certain ways and responds in certain ways, but they don't necessarily kind of validate that infrastructure is there. And I found there was piece of the infrastructure that I could just not deploy, and those tests would not fail. And so I wrote a set of Pester tests that would kind of go, okay, let's actually look at this from a infrastructure and application perspective and go, right, is all of the resources there that we expect and in the quantities that we expect them to be? Are there any more resources that shouldn't be there? So it's okay, we should have 5 scale sets. We shouldn't have 6 scale sets or 4 scale sets. So then you can kind of be like, well, why have we got an extra scale set? And that can help you kind of flush out problems with your deployment or where stuff's been spun up manually. And
that's such a critical first step, is defining what things should be. For cloud stuff, for anything really, if you know what the policy or what things should look like whenever an application is deployed, you can define that and then start taking advantage of testing to ensure it. Because maybe one time you actually get a ticket for it. Oh, let me check this out. But if you write a test on it, you can share that with others. You can really empower things, and hopefully less tickets for you, less repeated work, so you don't have to check the thing again. It's just, I just love that approach to things.
It becomes a troubleshooting tool as well, because we have an environment that's not working. The first thing I'll do now is just run these tests, and it does 1,000 checks on the system, and it takes 2 minutes to run, and I can go, oh, it's picked up that there's some configuration missing that should be there, or that configuration's not what we expected it to be set to, and that allows us to kind of trace down where a problem is really quickly, much quicker than sort of trawling through application logs and trying to work out what errors you're getting and why those errors are occurring. So yeah, it's really great. But I say, I'm still a big fan of, and I still use it daily for that kind of infrastructure application, validation type testing. So I put a module. I've got a module in GitHub for testing Active Directory for sort of best practices and things. But I know people have built better ones than mine. So that you've probably talked about them before. But there's some really good modules out there for sort of validating Active Directory. And then I did eventually get my head around like testing your code with Pester. And I'm not a person that I'm not disciplined enough still to write my tests first and then write my code. I'd love to be that guy one day, but I tend to write my code and then write my tests. But you would not believe the number of times that I kind of retrospectively write my tests and then find that the code like didn't work in a way that I expected it to work. And it's all just about kind of like looking at, particularly anywhere where you've got like if statements, where your code can follow various paths, can't it? It can kind of go, right, if this, then do this, if that, then do that. And so there are multiple ways within which someone can start and finish your code. And so it's really just about kind of writing tests that exercise all of those paths. And yeah, so many times I've written a test and then I've gone, oh, it's failing. I must have got the test wrong. And I've gone, oh no, it's actually my code's not working the way I expected it to. And you look a bit closer and you can see where you've made a mistake. So yeah, really helpful.
Yeah. I love what you said about infrastructure and testing. I think it's just such an easy win in general. Like I've used it before for we had workstations, and in our environment, certain things were kind of required for, or there were decisions that were to be made about each computer. Maybe some would have this enabled, some wouldn't, but you can write a Pester test that checks for all these things. Is this application installed? Is this whatever available? Do they have this? And you can return that to yourself, and you can provide that to your help desk team or whoever needs to troubleshoot issues. Or, maybe you have like recurring stuff and you just automate the testing. And if it fails, you find out like, okay, hey, for some reason, somebody enabled this on so-and-so's computer. We shouldn't be doing that. But just any way you can scale your PowerShell, and Pester and infrastructure testing is such a great way to be able to define things and then check for it forever and have a script that you can improve over time. If you're using source control too, we want to start heading in that direction because it will lead to such an easier IT life. Yeah, there's a lot of moving parts you kind of got to get a grasp of, and it does take some time. But like that's where we're heading, is more automation, less stress, less pressure on you to get everything organized and running the right way. You do it once and you can free up your brain to tackle the next problem, which is like, for me, that was my favorite thing. Because you said in your job, you have some agency to sort of automate and improve things. And when you're able to focus on a project, create a solution in the right way that's maintainable, right? That maybe has some great testing with it or whatever, you're able to have that be like its own contained piece of work. It's not something that you need to be directly attached to ensuring is perfect for the rest of your career because you've done it in the right way.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. And that's where those kind of tests are so valuable. If you're sort of writing code, then having a certain standard and building those sort of guardrails around, having Pester tests to validate the code works. So it allows you to hand that off to someone else or to pass it on, when you leave, and know that it's going to be kind of protected and looked after. And if someone makes some changes to it that break it in a way that it wasn't expecting to, then those tests are going to pick that up. I think I'd come back to the infrastructure tests. The nice thing talking about pipelines is, you can stick those infrastructure tests on the end of your pipeline. And, much as I run them ad hoc, it's nice to be able to kind of stick something at the end of a pipeline and go, yeah, I expect everything to be deployed. Well, then I'll just run these tests. And then you're making sure that they don't get forgotten about. You're sort of finishing off that. And all these little tools that are automatic, again, they can be kind of tied together. That's what I'm really enjoying with the YAML pipelines, because you can kind of define we've got our kind of deployment defined into various phases, and then I can create what I started referring to as the super pipeline, which just ties like everything together into one big hit. And then I kind of go, right, well, actually, like all of this stuff can just be run end to end, all in one go. And some of it can happen at the same time because it's spinning up stuff in different places, and just watching that stuff kind of like progress through and all just sort of come to life with just like one click or on a schedule is like, it's great. Yeah, it's really awesome.
While we're talking about Pester, I know there's probably a lot of us out there who haven't yet dabbled, and maybe some of this sounds a little fancy. Great entry point into Pester and sort of getting your feet wet, especially if you're earlier in your PowerShell journey, is PS koans. It is a way of learning PowerShell by editing Pester tests. And it shows you different features in PowerShell and a bit about the language. And also you'll be working in VS Code looking at Pester tests. So kind of a double win there.
Yeah, I've not personally played with that, but I have heard of it, and it looks really good.
It's pretty sweet.
Pester's like, actually, it is. My experience was, it does feel overwhelming when you first pick up something new and different. but actually it's quite simplistic, Pester. The online documentation is great. Going back to your podcast from a few episodes ago where someone was saying, read the docs, man. Why do people Google? They don't read the documentation. It's so true, but the Pester documentation is brilliant. It's really detailed. It's got lots of really good examples. It's a really well maintained project as well.
Yeah.
I'll tell you what I wanted to say as well is Stack Overflow. So you can ask PowerShell questions on Stack Overflow. You can also tag a question as Pester, and I kind of try and keep an eye on that. That's kind of like my give back to the Pester community. Is I've set up email notifications on that tag, and I want more people to kind of bring their Pester questions to Stack Overflow. Particularly if you tag them Pester and PowerShell, you'll get an answer so fast because it's really well maintained.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate you putting in that effort. And I'll also say that pretty much every language out there has some kind of testing framework, and we are fortunate in PowerShell to have Pester. It's been really cool to see it take off so much and be so supported because we really, it is a big benefit to a language to have a good testing framework. Yeah,
it was the first non-Microsoft module to be bundled into Windows.
You're exactly right. It was the first one to ship with Windows. Yeah, pretty cool.
Which then became a bit of a pain point because you'd end up with Pester 3.5. Mm-hmm. And you're no, I don't want Pester 3.5. I want newer. But it was great that it was when because that was really groundbreaking for me as well. When it started to become just on Windows by default, then I didn't have to worry about having to install Pester to be able to run some local tests against a virtual machine. I could trust that it was already there and have those things executing. But yeah.
I'm surprised you knew that. That's impressive. I knew that too.
I know my Pester history. Yeah. I self-styled myself as Pester's biggest fan because I did a talk. PowerShell. There's a PowerShell UK conference called PS Day, and I did a Pester talk there. And I was kind of it's still my header on my banner on Twitter because I made a joke at the start of being people expected the foremost expert in Pester, but they got Mark Wragg instead. And I obviously encourage people to teach anything that you feel vaguely confident about because you'll be amazed how much your own experience and knowledge grows through kind of teaching. But yeah, Pester's great. I'm such a fan.
Number one fan. I didn't do that research. I should have known you're the number one fan. But so that PS Day talk, I think you gave a couple, right? Yeah, I did one, and then I sort of thought, well, I'll do another one. Again, I'm going to hark back to another one of your podcasts because someone was talking to you, I think, recently about sort of reusing your content recently. And I kind of did that. I think you contributed to the PowerShell conference book. Yeah. I think I had something that, so I contributed to 1 and 2. Was that 1 and 2? Yeah. 1 and 2, just for you, man. And both of them, I don't know, I can't remember which came first, but I kind of either did the talk and then I was like, well, I'll turn this into a chapter, or I did the chapter and then I turned it into a talk. It might have been one way or the other, but first one was on Pester, just trying to get people. It was a real kind of 101 Pester session, just kind of okay, evolution of your PowerShell scripts and just trying to get people to just appreciate that Pester was not complicated and, it's really powerful, and, the speed at which you can then start to kind of validate your code. And every time you make a change, to be able to kind of go, rather than, because again, you may do this, but, I'll modify my scripts and then I'll run it myself and go, yeah, it's doing the thing I expect it to do. But actually then you run your Pester test and it goes, well, I'm going to run it 100 different ways and see if it does what you expect it to do. And that's really powerful as you kind of maintain things. And then the second talk I did was on some monitoring tools. So it was a little bit PowerShell adjacent. I was using PowerShell to pull out, as a kind of a bit of a homebrewed monitoring system to kind of pull disk space and CPU and memory, and then pushing them into. There's this tool called Influx, which is a time series database. So it's really good for monitoring. So you can kind of, I've written a PowerShell module for writing stuff into Influx. So you've got time series data. So, as soon as you write it in, it's time stamped when you've written it in. And then you'd sort of plug that into Grafana as a way to kind of visualize stuff. So it was about kind of building that platform through those tools, which are all free. And you have modules on them as well. I'll have some links in show notes. Check them out. You even have blogs on this. I mean, you got it covered, man.
Yeah, you're not going to believe it, but the same guy that got me into PowerShell and Pester told me to start blogging.
Come on. Can we shout this guy out, or is he Secret Santa, or what?
Yeah, it's a man called Sam Martin, who, he's gone a bit to the dark side because he works for AWS now, and I don't know. I don't know if they're like really heavy on the NDAs there, but I don't hear so much from him anymore. But he was quite a community PowerShell guy a few years ago, and has got a lot of stuff. He has a PowerShell module for ServiceNow. So if you use like ServiceNow, which is a ticketing system, and you want to like use PowerShell to pull stuff in or out of that, you built a PowerShell module around that. And I know someone else has picked that up and maintained it, which is great. That's the other thing I love seeing in this community is that people will build tools. And then obviously, like, their work will change and their focus will shift, and they're not, I don't use this tool so much anymore, but other people in the community will pick it up and run with it and continue to maintain it.
I love that too. And I'm trying to drive more people to do that. I recently ran an internal PowerShell user group at work, and they were like, hey, how do I find projects that I could contribute to in the PowerShell world? And I didn't have an amazing answer other than finding projects you like, or are already using, or that, maybe look at the popular ones or something like that. It's helpful to have a use case. You can't it's not as helpful, it's just a random one you're not using. But I should be plugging more of those, like asking the community, hey, do you have a PowerShell project that you are looking for contributors to? And plugging them with it, because I think that's like so critical, because people will develop solutions to solve a need at a particular time, and then they'll move on to different things. And having more people in the community who are capable and willing to step up and help maintain these projects, because oftentimes it's like small quality of life type stuff. Maybe there's a new endpoint, maybe there's some other small tweaks you need to make with an updated version, but having more people doing that would be massively helpful, and to all of us, really. So I need to start banging on that drum.
Yeah, for sure. I know. I saw on GitHub recently that there's a tag they've introduced called like Good First Issue, which you can use if you want to encourage people to, like, if you've got something that you think is okay, this is a small change that someone who's new to GitHub or new to coding could maybe pick up. So maybe we need to start using that with PowerShell projects, encouraging people to use that Good First Issue with a PowerShell project, and then you could probably filter for PowerShell and Good First Issue.
Yeah, I didn't think about filtering for that Good First Issue, but I did notice that is something that people are using. Like, shout out to MDGRS. I contributed to a project that had a Good First Contributor or Good First Issue tag on it, and it was my first contribution to his project. So. All right, I want to loop in and talk some PowerShell AzCostTools. So I've highlighted it on the podcast before, but can you introduce us to why you came up with this module and what's up with pricing in Azure, and why would you need to care about money that you spend?
Yeah, so it's just it was something that I had a sort of a smaller version of it that I was using internally. So as I think I said earlier, I took upon myself to kind of like start looking after our costs and having a real focus on our costs, because management was certainly realizing that that Azure was expensive, and what kept coming up was they were doing like quarterly reviews, and people would say, why is like non-production costing more than production? And we would kind of go, well, there's just we have a lot of environments in non-production, and we do a lot of different testing, but we had to sort of eventually take a real sort of close look at why were we doing that, or what environments we had, and I was able to kind of like save quite a lot of money by establishing, well, firstly, just once I got someone to just admit that we didn't have to run everything full time, and once we kind of got over the sort of fear factor of, particularly because myself and my colleague, we inherited our kind of existing environment, so there was a little bit of kind of like, well, I didn't build this, I don't want to break it and then not be able to rebuild it. Once we kind of gained the confidence to be able to stand up the environment from scratch, then it got a lot less scary to be able to kind of tear stuff down and stand stuff up. And that made a real difference in cost. But what I wanted to be able to do is I wanted to be able to report like every month what our costs were, and then I wanted to be able to say how that compared to last month. And of course, like, there's some really good tools like within the Azure portal to be able to pull out cost graphs. But to answer that like specific question of like, what did it cost this month? What did it cost last month? And what's the difference? Is like, that's just a maths question, isn't it? So yeah, I wrote a little PowerShell script, and our we're split across multiple subscriptions. And again, the cost tools are great. And I think you can sort of create like a management tier above subscriptions, but I wasn't in a position, I didn't have enough rights in our tenant to be able to kind of create like a management group. So I use PowerShell and the AZ commandlets to just pull out the cost data from, last month and the month before, and then do that calculation of kind of what the difference is. And AzCostTools is a bit of like a public and slight evolution of that. So it does that, which is that, it gets your cost, it compares it to the previous month's cost, but it also has some more functionality that, well, firstly, I discovered there's a module called it's PS Park Lines, because it's like P Spark Lines. Like he reused the S in the name, and I kind of wish he hadn't, because it makes it really hard to say. But essentially, I think it's like like a PowerShell recreation of a Python module, where you can, in Python, you have this ability to build sparkline graphs, which are just real like simplistic console-based charts. And I just thought that was really cool, and I wanted to sort of implement that in something useful. So obviously with your AzCost, they change, unless you've got a really static environment, they tend to change on a day-to-day basis. So having the module kind of build a little graph output as it's pulling down your costs to show like how your daily costs have changed. And then the module has the ability to kind of like show where you've gone like over budget for a day and under budget, which of course, again, it's all information that you can get in the portal, but having it there in the console is it's really quick and it's accessible. I don't think my expectation was ever that someone would like use this stuff and actually kind of present it as a report to someone, because there are prettier ways to generate graphs, but just to get that information like really quickly and in a visual way, for me felt quite powerful.
Well, that's sweet. And I love highlighting things where someone puts in a lot of work, and to take advantage of it, you just have to run a few lines and you can look like a genius to your boss. I mean, no credit where credit's due, but I just love easy wins like this. If you're using Azure, if you're spending money in Azure, if you have no insight into it, this is a great way to start getting some insights into that and seeing where your costs are. And, managers, they care about money. So if you can put things into dollars and cents for them, it can make a lot of dollars and cents.
I'm sort of learning about myself through this stuff that I'm quite competitive, and that I kind of like, I create this like competitiveness within my own tasks. So there's nothing more fun than kind of like getting some figures and then being like, right, next month we're gonna get that even lower. And it's not always the case, because obviously demand changes. Like a lot of places, and it's true where I am at the moment, you have like you have a cadence, don't you? You have like a development cycle, and you tend to kind of like ramp up testing towards the end of your development cycle, or you might have like a Black Friday situation where you have to kind of really scale stuff up in preparation for those like big seasonal events. But knowing kind of like being able to like pull your cost data across like a long period and see that kind of cadence allows you to then to start kind of predicting, okay, well, this month should be cheap because actually, it's like February and we don't expect a lot to go on here. And so, it allows you to kind of make those comparisons really easily and get that data out. And ultimately as well, you stick a -raw switch on it and it just dumps out all the raw data along with, it does like some calculations and stuff for you, but ultimately if you want to then process that yourself and export it to Excel and do your own kind of calculations and graphs and stuff on it, then that's really easy to do. The beauty of a PowerShell object.
Amazing. Well, that's very cool. So check it out. I'll have links in the show notes. AzCostTools, you can install module. And honestly, the PS Parkworks or whatever, Park Lines, I love whenever things in the console look cool. So plus one to that. Check it out.
Yeah, you got me. I hadn't heard of a couple of episodes ago. You were talking about 2Es, and I hadn't heard of that module that allows you to create that terminal user interface. That was really cool. I had a little play with that.
Yeah,
it's nice to be able to do stuff like in the console, isn't it?
It's fun. What's old is new, and it's back. And I just love not having to switch consoles. It just feels, I feel like elite Hacksaw whenever I'm like in my console. We got cool colors, we got graphs coming up. I know exactly what I'm doing. This computer is mine. Yeah, I like it.
It helped with PowerShell Coordinate when it went black. I think it got a lot cooler.
Yeah. All right. You ready?
Yeah.
We've had some easy questions so far. I've kind of set you up for some great answers, which you had some home runs in there. So great work to you. And we've come a long way from being the nervous Nellies that we were before we hit record. So epic episode so far. Thank you, everybody who's been listening. But Mark, take me back. If PowerShell were an action figure from your childhood, what would it be?
Hey, you never prepped me with this question.
No, I did not. This is authentic. You're here. You got to answer it right. Everyone who's answered these off-the-wall questions has been perfect so far, so no pressure.
Oh, God, an action figure from my childhood.
I don't know why I asked that. And I don't think I know any action figures from your childhood. So
yeah, I mean, I loved Thundercats. So yeah, I would say Lion-O. Let's go Lion-O with this tiny cat pants. Yeah, I mean, PowerShell could be any action figure because it is such a great tool.
Well, Lion-O it is. I had no clue that you knew the character names from that, so that is impressive. All right. Now for the ones that you know are coming. All right. I had to catch you a little off guard, put you on your toes. First of all, I want to say shout out Mark's kids. Hi, your dad's really cool. You should listen to him and be good kids. So keep being curious and awesome. I know you mentioned earlier that your kids overheard you in a podcast that you were listening to. Did I make that up?
Yeah.
Okay. I thought, okay, you said something about like you heard your name on the podcast and it got you because I was trying to get you on the podcast for a while. And then that was what really sold it was you heard your name on it.
Yes, sorry, no, you didn't make that up. Well, no, I was they weren't in the car actually. I was I'd done a school run when you mentioned me a few weeks ago. And I was just driving back from the school run, so yeah, I'll make sure to play this one in the car for them if you want to say hi.
I mean, if you want to listen to yourself for an hour, it can be hard to.
I don't think I do actually.
And you'll have to listen to it twice too, because you'll be there on the premiere. So yeah, it's my favorite part is seeing all the words I misspoke on. It's always fun. It's a live podcast recording. But all right. Consistent questions. Sidebar over. Sorry, I'm just having too much fun, man. It's been great. This is our first time chatting. We're newfound friends, so appreciate everyone who's been listening along and coming for the ride. But what is one time something went wrong on the job, and what did you end up learning? We're talking big time mess ups.
Yeah, I mean, like I've had lots. I'm not going to name them all. Well, I thought about this one for a while. And for me, I was like, you never forget like the first time you really mess up in IT, and that was what my mind came back to. Was kind of like my first big screw up, and it was I was working for like a desktop. It was like a desktop support role, and it was like early 2000s. It might have been 2000 actually, and I was tasked with like rebuilding someone's laptop. And so we would use like Norton Ghost to just take like a backup of the machine and then like wipe the machine, reinstall the OS, reinstall the apps, and then you'd use the Ghost image to like bring back their data. And so I did that only to discover that the Ghost image like was not working. I hadn't worked at all. I'd wiped out their laptop, I'd deleted all their data, then went back to my backup and found that it didn't work at all. And it was like a limitation in Norton Ghost that the machine had like a more than 20 gig hard drive, and the version of Norton Ghost that didn't support hard drives larger than 20 gig, which dates me horribly. But yeah, what I learned, was like, I think why I took away from that was like how my managers dealt with it, which is that like there wasn't like I wasn't like told off, or I wasn't like, there wasn't any finger pointing. I don't even think they told the guy, and the guy's laptop, he was like quite a senior director. They didn't tell him it was me that made the mistake. They just focused on like, what can we do to resolve the issue? They use like data recovery tools. They got a lot of his data back, but the way they kind of dealt with it, the sort of calmness that they were kind of like, okay, the mistakes happened. Let's think about what can we do to kind of come back from this. And that kind of like calm approach to sort of a disaster, and the respect with which they showed me to kind of go, do you know what? Everyone makes mistakes. That was my big, I think, takeaway from that, and that's what I hope anyway. I've driven through. I've had a couple of little management roles, and it's certainly how I like to treat people. Like if things go wrong, and they do go wrong, and a whole sort of like blameless post-mortem thing can, I think, sometimes go a little bit too far with regards to you do have to dig into why things went wrong and where they went wrong, and do try to get to the truth of a matter. But treating people with respect and understanding that people are human and mistakes are going to be made, and then creating that like culture of trust so that people kind of feel comfortable, kind of just, they're not hiding stuff. So they're kind of going, hey, do you know what? I messed up. Here's how I messed up. Here's what I did. And, you get to the bottom of those problems, and you get out of those problems much faster than if someone kind of feels like, oh man, I can't tell anyone the mistake I made. So then you've got to like figure out what they did when they don't want you to know. So yeah, that was my big takeaway from my first screw up, was, how to treat people when they've made mistakes.
Nice. Yeah, that's pretty cool to hear that people had that philosophy back in the day as well, because there's a chance that if you have a bad experience with something like that, where you make a mistake and you get reamed for it or kind of told off, there's a chance that in the future, like you said, you might not be honest with things that you do, or you might not be curious and have the sort of psychological safety to try new things and learn and grow into, ultimately, you became Mark Wragg. I mean, so
well, I was always Mark Wragg, actually. But
oh, that's right. Okay, fair enough.
But yeah, absolutely. And if anyone is working in a company where they don't feel comfortable like admitting mistakes they made, it's not you, it's them. Like that's their cultural issue, not yours. And there are better companies out there for sure.
For sure. Unfortunately, it seems like more and more people are starting to kind of get with it. Like it's less of a rarity, at least from what I sort of see with my feelers out there.
Yeah. I think a lot of the big companies have been really open with their mistakes as well. It'll be interesting. There's been like a Meta outage recently, isn't there? And it'd be interesting to see whether they do like a public post-mortem. A lot of these big companies now, they're willing to kind of go and just in public, just share, what went wrong and the mistakes they made and what they learned. And just again, having that transparency builds trust ultimately.
It's funny, on the last episode that hasn't aired yet, I'm recording a couple sequential order, but we actually talked about the Okta postmortem. I spoke with Adil from Okta, and we talked about, being honest in your postmortems, creating a culture where these companies are sharing information, sort of setting a standard with some of these security incidents, that we're being honest and open. And it really does help garner trust with people in tech, because, I like this phrase, real recognize real. You can't BS people when we can see the facts and connect the dots. So being honest goes a long way at earning trust, and also being held with any kind of respect or reverence.
Yeah, you can only blame DNS for so long, right?
Yep. Or blame an intern. Yeah.
Yeah, blame an intern. Yeah.
It's a wild world out there in the security and cloud space. Interesting times. I feel like there's always, it always seems like things are sort of on fire in some way, depending on what you read. But we're all right. We're hanging in there. We're automating to free ourselves up to be more aware of security things and better configurations and all that. That's one of my sort of goals, is like, hopefully everyone can increase their security just a little bit. Maybe you hear one thing that you sort of implement and make things better, because it is just such a big landscape that we are ultimately responsible for. All right. Sorry for that rant. Next, we have, with your knowledge now, what one tip would you give yourself when starting in IT?
Yeah. I was going to say initially was, like, I saw a celebrity answer this question recently, and they said they wouldn't tell themselves anything because they'd be worried about like breaking the space-time continuum or
oh my gosh,
causing a paradox. But in reality, I think without wanting to inadvertently erase my children from existence, I would tell my younger self to make those community contributions earlier. As I said, it took me almost 10 years to get around to starting a blog, and only after someone kind of encouraged me. And I think a lot of people say this all the time, but there are a lot of people out there that are probably thinking, I should start a blog, but I don't have anything new to contribute. And as again someone said on your podcast recently, it doesn't matter, because fresh content is really important and new perspectives are really important. And it doesn't always have to be groundbreaking stuff. Lots of people have had great success and have made really useful resources just covering all the basics, and in really good detail. So yeah, I think if I was giving myself advice, I definitely get contributing to the community, find your community, find ways to kind of put stuff out there and build those relationships and share knowledge, because what you get back from that is really great, for sure. I was gonna mention I originally listened to a PowerShell podcast. Don't know if you know of it, the Power Scripting podcast.
Oh, I came up on that one. Yeah.
Did you? Yeah, and that was like one of my like starts with. I'm not like on it, but it was really helpful to me because the really early episodes of that were just like a commandlet a day. He was just like, he would just talk about like a commandlet a day, and I'd be like driving, I had a long commute to work, and I'd be able to just listen to something and then get to work and be like, oh, I just found out about this thing called, select string, and I can use it to like filter files, and yeah, just like anything you can do to kind of put stuff out there in any format is going to have some value to someone. So yeah, that'd be my advice to myself.
And shout out to the Power Scripting Podcast.
Yeah, yeah. I look back at their episodes because you can still listen to them, and they interviewed like Jeffrey Snover in like 2008, and it was really funny because they spelled his name slightly wrong, and they were talking to him like, I think maybe at that point he wasn't the big deal that for us now he's the Messiah, and I think back then he was just like, he was this name that not many people had heard of, and did this thing called PowerShell. So yeah, I love how far we've come as a community.
I'll say I might be chatting with Mr. Snover in a couple of weeks here. Got any questions I should ask him? What's one you'd ask him if you were to ask him?
Oh man, you put me on the spot again.
I know, and I'm going to use whatever you say. So
I don't think I would. I think I just want to thank him.
Space-time continuum kind of thing.
Yeah, I'd ask him what he's up to at Google. Actually, that's probably what I'd ask him, because he's gone to Google, hasn't he? And I'd love to know what he's building there. I bet he's doing great things. Yeah,
he should be a fun one to chat with. I'm curious to see. He knows PowerShell. That's super cool and awesome. But I'm curious, like getting change done at a big organization. That's its own beast.
Yes.
That he clearly has some experience with getting PowerShell adopted in Microsoft. So I'm curious to hear what skills he has there.
What? Again, I didn't listen to it all, but I listened to a little bit of that episode from the PowerScripting podcast, and that's exactly what they talked about. It was a tough sell to kind of, particularly in an organization that size. And it's like a small nation, Microsoft, with the number of employees it has. Getting them to appreciate what PowerShell was, and you probably heard him tell the story, but he had to just sit himself in a room for a month and bash out 15,000 lines of code to try and create something that people could then appreciate what it was that he was building. So yeah, that is definitely something worth asking, how you make that change. I hope in Google he's got an easier time because it's a bit younger and a bit more adaptable perhaps, but equally pretty big. So yeah.
Awesome. Well, last question. What are 3 of your favorite modules?
Yeah, I mean, so I obviously we already talked about it, but I have to say Pester, because I think Pester is the one I come back to for so many things, for keeping my code on the straight and narrow, and also for all the infrastructure automation that we've already talked about. It's obviously my favorite module. I'm getting a lot of use. There's a module called VS Team, which is the PowerShell module for automating against like Azure DevOps, and because I think Azure DevOps used to be called Visual Studio Team Services. So it's not quite so discoverable anymore under its new name, but Microsoft love renaming things. And yeah, the VS Team module is really great because it wraps all the APIs for Azure DevOps and allows you to kind of pull down your pipeline information or variables. And again, I'm writing like tests around like the pipeline configuration to make sure that they are configured correctly or variables are in the right place. And I wrote a few PowerShell scripts that again like trigger pipelines through the API and do things like approval. So that's a really nice module for building automation around Azure DevOps and getting info out of your Azure DevOps. And then PoshGit, which is like it just supplements your prompt in the terminal with like what branch you're on and how many files you have committed or changed or modified. And I don't know where I'd be without that now. It's so helpful to see kind of where you are when you're in a Git repository. I love PoshGit. And then I wanted to give an honorable mention to terminal-icons, which is just fun. I don't know again if you've heard of it, but it's just allows you to when you do get the child icon dir or whatever, it allows you to sort of see icons depending on the file type and colors that make that kind of output of the file system much friendlier and easier to kind of follow, which I don't really love that. That's one that's in my profile. It gets loaded every day.
Hey, I'll have to get that one. I have not, but I love Brandon Dev Black Ops, so Definitely have to check that out. And I love
it's
fancy.
It can be a little fiddly to install, so you have to have the right font. You have to have a font that supports the icons. So yeah, it can be a little fiddly to get started with. But once you get
I'm on Mac,
pretty.
So
you'll be all right.
Another thing in there. Yeah, we'll be all right. Awesome. Mark, it's been a true pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you, listeners, for being along with us for this awesome chat. Give us a like, comment, subscribe. Give us a 5-star review on Apple Podcasts or your podcast platform of choice. We're here every week all over the world. Recently ranked number 220 in South Korea. Shout out. I'm pretty sure that's just from MDGRS. Pretty sure him and maybe one coworker. So shout out to you. We've dropped since then, but for 1 or 2 days in the past week, we were there.
Is there a Gibraltar ranking?
I bet we're pretty high in Gibraltar. We'll have to check that. Shout out to you, Adrian. Convince those coworkers to listen to. We'll really up those numbers. I want to say PowerShell MVP nominations are being accepted. PowerShell@pdq.com, or any feedback at all, you can hit me up. I'm on socials at Andrew Pla. There's the PDQ Discord channel with the PowerShell scripting channel where we talk about episodes, sort of more like an inner circle type chat. Check it out. I also want to give a shout out to the PowerShell Discord, aka.ms/PS Discord. That is the official PowerShell community Discord. A lot of cool stuff going on there. A bunch of channels. Check out the news feed. I'm posting new episodes there. What else is going on, man? It's been great chatting with you across the world. Where can people find you on the World Wide Web, man?
It's my name. So yeah, I'm on Twitter. Can you still say Twitter? I'm on the website formerly known as Twitter, as Mark Wragg. Wragg spelled with a W. and
in 2 G's.
Yeah, I'm on GitHub. Yeah, 2 G's. Yeah, I have to say that whenever I call the call center. And then, I'm on GitHub. All my projects are on GitHub, and my blog is rag.io. So, yeah, follow me in any of those places if you're interested. And also just happy to help, or always nice to hear from anyone. I'd say Stack Overflow is a good place.
Awesome. Any final messages?
No, I don't think so. Thank you so much for having me. It's been a real pleasure.
Thanks for joining me. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Have a great rest of your day. Or night.
Thanks for listening to the PowerShell Podcast. The PowerShell Podcast is a PDQ production, making device management simple, secure, and pretty damn quick.